would you like to improve your health and keep your family safe? You're listening to the Healthy Home Hacks podcast, where we firmly believe enjoying optimal health shouldn't be a luxury. Healthy Home Authorities and husband and wife team Ron and Lisa will help you create a home environment that will level up your health. It's time to hear from the experts. Listen in on honest conversations and gain the best tips and advice. If you're ready to dive in and improve your well-being and increase your energy, you're in the right place. All right, here are your hosts, bowel biologists, authors, media darlings, vicarious vegans, and avocado aficionados, Ron and Lisa Barris.
This episode of Healthy Home Hacks is brought to you by Naturepedic. Are you ready to enjoy a healthier, non-toxic sleep? Join the organic mattress revolution and rest easier on a certified organic mattress proudly crafted in the USA without petrochemicals, flame retardants, polyurethane foam, and other toxic chemical materials. Visit naturepedic.com and get ready to snooze in the lap of organic luxury. And friends, don't forget to use code Ron and Lisa 15. That's Ron and Lisa 15 to save 15% on new mattresses for the whole family.
Hi, friends, and welcome to today's show. Question: have you gotten unstuck on Nonstick yet? If you follow us at ronaldlisa.com, then you are well aware of the dangers of the multi-billion-dollar class of chemicals used to make products stain, grease, and water resistance. You'll find these things in coatings on carpets and clothing, in microwave popcorn bags and fast food wrappers, even on waterproof and stain-repellent clothing. Think your swimsuit, tennis shoes, and yes, even your Apple Watch. I often hear people refer to them as Teflon chemicals, but today we're gonna break down exactly what PFAS chemicals are and how you and your family are exposed and the health implications associated with these.
And we have a very special guest, a senior scientist from the Environmental Working Group, Tasha Stoiber. Oh, and if you're not familiar with the absolutely fantastic and groundbreaking work of EWG, climb out from under that toxic rock and get familiar, because EWG's team of scientists, policy experts, lawyers, and communications and data experts have been providing education for over 30 years to help you and your loved ones live better through breakthrough research and reforming our nation's broken chemical safety laws, one toxin at a time. They're basically the Justice League for health and the environment.
Yes, Lisa. And Tasha is one of those superheroes. She earned a Ph.D. in environmental chemistry and technology at the University of Wisconsin and a BS in biology and environmental engineering at Michigan Technological University. And today, Tasha works to better understand the connections between exposure to chemicals and public health. She researches contaminants in water, indoor air pollution, and chemicals in consumer products. Before joining EWG, Tasha worked as an environmental engineer. She pursued postdoctoral study in the ecotoxicology of nanoparticles at the University of California, Davis, and the U.S. Geological Survey.
Welcome to the show, Tasha.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ron and Lisa. I don't think I've ever been called a superhero before.
You are so modest, Tasha.
You so earned that. And get your cape out. And guys, we have such a special show in store for you today. So Tasha, I know everyone's chomping at the bit to find out about these chemicals. So let's dive right in.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Our listeners are familiar with PFCs, or perfluorinated chemicals, that are widely used to make water, grease, and stain repellent coatings. But I know the EPA is now trying to use PFAS rather than PFCs to describe the chemicals in this group. Can you explain this and tell our listeners what PFAS is?
Sure. A big part of understanding this problem is understanding just what these chemicals are. And I think people are becoming more educated and more aware of where you can find these chemicals and what the health dangers are. PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS for short, includes this huge family of chemicals. And PFCs used to be what they were referred to formerly, but now this huge family of chemicals is known as PFASs. As you mentioned in the introduction, a lot of people might be familiar with the terms Teflon or Scotchgard, and these are the names associated with these stain-resistant coatings that are found in a lot of your different products. What's happening is some of the most egregious of this huge family of chemicals, they're being phased out. What companies are doing is actually using really similar chemicals to replace them. But what we're finding is that these replacement chemicals have the same health harms associated with the original chemicals. That's the issue that's happening right now.
Right. And that just brings me to BPA, bisphenol A, right? We saw the same thing happen with that, right? When they started replacing, everyone's touting BPA free, but they were using sometimes more harmful chemicals in place of it, correct?
That's absolutely correct. And that's what we call regrettable substitutions. And that's why we
There's a word for it.
There's a term for it. There's a term for it.
We're going to call it that too, Tasha.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why we want to push for looking at all of these chemicals, because there's so many different ones. There's actually thousands of these chemicals out there, hundreds that we know about that the EPA has tracked that are used in consumer products. We don't want to just be looking at one at a time and studying one at a time, because that's going to take way too long. So we want to look at this whole family of chemicals. What ties them together is that they have these similar structures and they have these really strong carbon and fluorine bonds. That's what gives them the properties like being stain resistant, oil resistant, grease proof, and whatnot. These same properties that make them ideal for these uses is what is related to them being so harmful. It's also related to their persistence in the environment. Because of these really strong bonds, they don't really break down.
How are humans exposed to these PFAS chemicals?
Should we be calling them PFAS or PFASs, or is it interchangeable?
You can call them PFAS. That's easy to remember.
Okay.
Or you can call them per and polyfluoroalkyl.
No.
PFAS.
I'm just so proud of myself for saying perfluorinated chemicals. I'm going to leave it at that. I got that.
That's great.
How are humans exposed, Tasha, to PFAS chemicals?
Right. That's a really good question. And that question can be answered by thinking about it's going to be different for where you live, what job you have, who you are, what your age is. All of those things are going to affect how you're exposed. For a small child or baby or an infant that's crawling around on the floor, spending a lot of time playing near the carpet, really the dust that comes off of a stain-treated carpet, that's going to be one of the primary exposure routes for someone that's that small. For other people, food might be an important exposure as well. PFAS build up, they accumulate in our bodies, and they also accumulate in fish and seafood. Food can be an important exposure route as well. And PFAS, of course, are also used in food packaging, pizza boxes, popcorn bags, things like that.
Fast food wrappers, right?
Fast food wrappers, absolutely. We did a study on fluorine in fast food wrappers, and also those compostable bowls, which are supposed to be good for the environment, the molded fiber bowls, they also can contain PFAS. PFAS from that food packaging can also get into your food. That's an exposure route of concern. And we're also concerned about drinking water, of course. And this is going to be important if you live in an area that has highly contaminated drinking water. That's going to be a significant exposure. Areas near...
Because to explain to our listeners, the municipal water companies aren't testing for that, correct? When your city tells you, hey, your water's safe, is that a chemical that's even being tested for?
That's another really good question. And a lot is happening in the last couple of years regarding that. It is an unregulated contaminant. The EPA did test for it as part of their unregulated contaminant monitoring program. a couple of years ago in 2013 and 2015. They did test for it then, and they are planning to test for it in an upcoming round of that program as well, as part of the very slow development of a possible federal standard, but just for 2 types of PFAS. So this is moving very slowly. And it's in the drinking water, and we're only testing for it after the fact. So it's a bit backwards. States have been doing a lot more. That has been happening on the federal level. There are standards in some states, and some states have been doing a lot more of their own testing. In places like New Jersey and Michigan, they have been testing for it more often. But on the state level, it's not a required test outside of that monitoring program.
Wow. I mean, water is just really an underlooked way that we get so many chemical exposures, and we filter. We just can't stress that enough. And even I say this a lot on the podcast because it's an overlooked way people get the chemicals from water is through ice cubes. I mean, I think they filter their water and then they go out, they get iced tea or iced coffees or drinks, lemonade, and they don't realize that they're getting tap water, chemicals, all those chemicals that would come in there. Our listeners might be familiar with some of the brands that contain PFAS. You mentioned, I think, Teflon and Scotchgard. There's Stainmaster, Polartec, and Gore-Tex. But even the PTFE, we see that on when we go to buy cookware. It'll say, hey, this cookware does not contain PTFE, hopefully. And it's also in dental floss. But what would you say is the biggest source of exposure? You mentioned dust and water and the cookware and the packaging. What would you say is the number one way people get this in their body?
Again, it'll depend if you have a really contaminated source of drinking water. If you're living in those areas, drinking water can be a significant source of contamination. For people that live near, PFAS is used in a number of these consumer products, but it can also contaminate drinking water from the use of AFFF foam. It's a type of firefighting foam that has been used at airports and at military sites for fire training. This use has led to a lot of drinking water contamination around the US. And so if you're living near one of those sites, your drinking water can be really highly contaminated. Or if you're near another type of industrial release site or something like that, drinking water can be a significant source of contamination. Or outside of that, food can also be a significant source of PFAS.
When you're using a cookware with PTFE, is that breaking down in the food while it's cooking, or is that only when it's in a gas form, or is it only when the cookware chips and particles get into the food?
That's a good question. So when we think about PFAS and cookware, it's good to think about the whole life cycle of that product. The biggest problem there comes from the production of the chemicals that go into the cookware. And that's going to be polluting the environment. And that's going to be polluting people and your drinking water for decades to come. The cookware now, it's a bit misleading because you could be shopping for a pan and the label says PFOA free or PFOA free. However, it could contain another type of PFAS.
Oh, you see it all the time. Like that's greenwashing at its finest, right? Just like we were talking about with bisphenol A. And what's that awesome documentary that just came out with Mark Ruffalo?
Oh, Dark Waters.
Dark Waters. So listeners, if you have not seen that, oh man, that's a great film. And there's another one, The Devil
We Know.
The Devil We Know. Similar story, right? About the Teflon contamination from DuPont in Ohio and the Ohio River and how it affected the cows and ultimately the people in the area. Super, super good. That'll dive deep into what we're not going to have time to get into today.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Hey, Tasha, you mentioned these chemicals are notoriously persistent in the environment and in the human body, and some have been linked to serious health effects. What are the health hazards from PFAS exposure, and who's the most vulnerable?
Right. That's a great question. Again, the health hazards are going to range quite a bit depending on your exposure. It could range from something that you yourself might not notice to actually life-changing health impacts for people that have been really highly exposed, either through working in an industry where they're exposed or living near a really contaminated site. The health effects, basically PFAS can affect nearly every major organ in your body. And the health effects range from impacts hormones. It can have effects on fertility and low birth weight, high cholesterol. It can impact your liver. PFAS have been linked to things like testicular cancer and kidney cancer. And also, it can harm your immune system. And the immune system is one of the most, I would say, vulnerable parts of your body because PFAS at these extremely low levels can impact your immune system, and it can do things like reduce the amount of antibodies that your body makes. And that can also reduce your body's response if you get a vaccine. That's another really timely thing to think about right now, too. And it can do this at levels that we're already seeing in people's bodies right now.
Wow. Children, I mean, for sure, I would think would be most vulnerable. And it's just so crazy when you said it doesn't take a whole lot. I think in the film, they did talk about women that worked at the plant. There was a high rate of miscarriages, correct? If I remember that right. The women were having miscarriages. Yeah.
Yeah, it can have effect on low birth weight, certainly fertility and development.
What percentage of Americans would you say have this chemical, the PFAS chemical, in their blood right now? And is there anything we can do to detox it out of our body?
This is a really startling realization as well. None of us are really safe from this chemical. Nearly all of us have this chemical in our bodies. The CDC has looked at the blood of Americans and found this chemical in nearly everyone.
Wow. Our producer just said he loves his cast iron and his stainless steel pans. Why don't more people get it? Cast iron is heavy. I dropped one on my foot at the store once.
He's an EWG groupie too, by the way. So
he's a groupie. Good. But I would agree. We love our stainless steel pans. I mean, you got to scrub a little harder. You got to get a little elbow grease, but like, it's just not worth that. The things that you can change, right? The things that are very obvious that you're getting exposure. Can we detox that out of our body?
You can't really detox it out of your body per se. I mean, if you reduce your exposure, these chemicals do accumulate in your body and they stay there for a while. But what you can do that will have a significant impact is make better choices. Like you mentioned before, filtering your drinking water is really important. First, researching your drinking water to find out if your tap water is contaminated is really important.
Listeners, go to the EWG tap water database because, like we talked about, we might not get that from our city water report. So where should we go to find out?
Right. You can check EWG's tap water database. It's ewg.org/tapwater. Any available testing from your utility, you'll be able to check there. And we have conducted several studies of sampling on our own, and we have results of those reports on our website as well, that you can also check those. And you can also check out the interactive map that lists sources of PFAS contamination, either industrial sites, military sites, things like that. And you can kind of check out in your area to see if there's a source of pollution there that you might be concerned about.
Okay, that's great.
That's excellent. Yeah. So you have a guy there. We'll actually post that in the show notes too, where they can find the steps to avoid PFAS chemicals. But can you share with our listeners some steps maybe now that they can do to eliminate exposure in their daily lives?
In addition to filtering the water.
In addition to filtering the water.
And Tasha, if you could answer this too, what filtration? Is it only reverse osmosis that will take that out? I'm guessing obviously carbon wouldn't.
Reverse osmosis filters are going to be the most effective way to remove PFAS from your drinking water, but the downside there is that they're quite expensive. Carbon filters will also remove PFAS. They're a little bit less expensive, but you do have to change them out and you have to remember to change them. You can check with your filter company and ask them what tests they have done. There's the certification for filters right now. I believe it only covers PFOA and PFAS, so you can contact the filter company and ask what else they've tested. But reverse osmosis filters are good, and activated carbon filters are also good as long as you remember to change them when they're supposed to be changed.
Like just
that can also be effective.
Okay, like a simple Brita pitcher would be effective enough to, because they have carbon, they're not large amounts of carbon. Aren't they? Yeah, those are carbon filters.
Yeah, they are. The percentage is not as high, right? It's maybe like 50% versus maybe getting 90+% with a reverse osmosis filter.
A Brita filter isn't going to be as effective as some other types of carbon filters. That's kind of the entry point. I can't speak off my head, but there are filters that are going to be more effective.
Yeah. Kind of like a lot of things. You get what you pay for with filtration. Our listeners have heard this, I'm sure, as I have. They're often referred to as forever chemicals. Can you touch upon why they got that name?
They're called forever chemicals because they don't really break down in the environment. Once they're out there, they can persist literally for decades, for ages. We don't really have good disposal methods for these chemicals as well. So once you toss it in a landfill or something like that, it doesn't really break down. It just kind of cycles through the environment and it's going to persist for a really long time. That's why they're called forever chemicals. And they can also be called everywhere chemicals because you can find them everywhere as well.
It's so scary for the future generation that we've made such a mess.
Oh my goodness.
That's crazy.
Do you know any studies offhand that have been done that are associated with health dangers?
Absolutely. I can talk about a few. I would say one of the landmark studies that resulted following the legal settlement or the legal case in West Virginia, that C8 panel did a large medical monitoring study, and they found evidence of serious health harms. That was the testicular cancer, kidney cancer, increased cholesterol, ulcerative colitis, and other thyroid effects related to PFOA. And, what we've been finding since then is just the more we study these chemicals, the more health effects really that we find. And the EPA has also done another toxicological assessment on some of the replacement chemicals that are supposed to be replacing PFOA and the long chain PFAS chemicals. And what they found in studying Gen X and PFAS was similar health harms as well.
Wow. It's just like going back to what grandma used. This goes with cleaning products and so many of the things that are causing so much havoc on our bodies and our planet. It really goes back to basics. A lot of these things that are making our life so convenient, even cell phones and radiation from that, and all of these things are causing so much harm to ourselves and our planet.
That's a good point. And we need to ask, do we actually need these chemicals? And the case is, in a lot of these products, is that we really don't. And that's what's going to be key to solving a lot of these problems, is basically turning off the tap. We don't need these chemicals. There's a lot of different alternatives.
Right. It's like, what's the price of a stain costing us, right? What's the price of a little elbow grease costing us? I mean, we are trading conveniences for this. That's really interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that it's in dust. Is this chemical semi-volatile? Can it get airborne in the dust? Like, can we actually inhale the dust that has the PFAS chemicals attached to it, like we can with flame retardants?
That's exactly right. The problem here is that these chemicals, they don't stay in the products, is that they're shed from the products. They come out of the products and they're in dust as a reservoir, all different types of chemicals and consumer products. And so it is really important for you to, no one likes to hear this, but it is really good to vacuum frequently, to dust frequently.
You're such a bully, Tasha. I agree. Very good. Good tip.
With the HEPA airtight vacuum. Don't recirculate those chemicals back in the house.
Absolutely. So it is important to get rid of that as much as you can, because if you do inhale it, it's on your hands as well. So
and
wash
the kids
your hands.
Kids are licking their fingers. The pets are getting that. I know you guys did a spectacular study years ago called Polluted Pets about the high level of toxins that pets have, more so than humans, because they are on the carpet and the floor and their water and their food and all of the things that they're getting exposed to as well. It's pretty profound if anyone's never seen that. It's a really great study. This was really great. There's so much more we could talk about, but I know we are crunched for time today. If you guys head on over to ronandlisa.com/podcast, we will have all the links in the show notes, including an EWG guide with steps to avoid PFAS chemicals in your daily life. Some of the things we didn't have time to talk about today.
Absolutely. And thank you, Tasha. This was like incredible. And we appreciate you being on our show. And
Thank you so much. It's so important to get the message out about this and to get people thinking about what can I do about this, both the individual level and at the community level.
If you have some of the issues that Tasha talked about today, hormone imbalances, thyroid issues, infertility, miscarriages, immune system, a lot of people don't take the time to associate that to a chemical in their water. They think, oh, it's got to be genetic. It's got to be something that was passed down. You can start changing your life today by making healthy steps. And thank you again, Tasha. Thank you, beautiful friends. We hope you enjoyed this info-packed show and hearing up close and personal from one of the top senior scientists at EWG. Be sure to visit them to learn more at ewg.org. And for all the links we discussed today, head to ronalisa.com/podcast and download the free guide.
See you next week. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Tasha.
Bye. Thank you.
This episode of the Healthy Home Hacks podcast has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more healthy living strategies and tactics to help you create the healthy home you've always dreamed of. And don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to bring you the best content. See you on the next episode.